Welcome to this edition of Under the Radar for Saturday, April 8th. And this week we'll be looking at the damned if you do and damned if you don't rule for males. And what better way to demonstrate this phenomenon than the manufactured outrage around Mike Pence's insistence on not having lunch alone with women who aren't his wife. How dare he? Mike Pence's evangelical refusal to lunch with ladies is easy to mock. It's also rape culture at work. Well, of course it is. Because not wanting to be alone with women is rape culture. Now, basically, this article attempts to do some mind reading of Mike Pence. Here's the crux of it. At its core, Pence's self-imposed ban is rape culture. Nor is that a label I assign lightly. Rape culture is a phrase so overused it's become almost meaningless, like calling someone a Nazi on the internet. So she's not completely without some self-awareness. But it has a very clear meaning. The notion, whether conscious or unconscious, that men can't control themselves around women because boys will be boys. The explicit reasons for Pence's restriction are religion and family, but the implicit reason is that he must avoid alone time with women lest his stringent religious moral code fall apart in the presence of a little lipstick and décolletage. That is rape culture. So basically Pence can't control his primal urges, so he won't be alone with any woman but his wife. But is that really the reason? Could it be that as a high-profile individual, it's prudent to not put yourself in a potentially compromising situation, especially given the hysteria around sexual harassment in the workplace? Remember last year, both the BBC and The Guardian ran with this headline. As I showed in a video, this survey used an unrepresentative sample, and the most prevalent form of sexual harassment was hearing colleagues making comments of a sexual nature about another woman or women in general in front of you. Or how about the National Union of Students survey here in Australia that showed that sexual harassment is rife on Australian university campuses? Again, using a non-representative sample. And the most prevalent form of sexual harassment? Staring. Anyway, here's Stephen Crowder and Ben Shapiro discussing the Pence issue.
Ben Shapiro, glad to have you here, sir. How are you?
I'm good. I mean, I'm at this hotel, and I make sure that when I'm in a hotel room, I'm only here with single women, not my wife, just to make sure the leftists are pleased.
Isn't that one of those? I mean, it's pretty mainstream in a lot of Christian denominations. You know, Muslims.
It's mainstream in Judaism, my friend. Like Orthodox Jews, there's a national name for it. It's called yichud, right? You're not supposed to be in seclusion with women who are not your wife. It's something I actually abide by. The idea is that I'll go out to dinner with a woman in a public place, or who's a business colleague, or if I'm having a meeting with a woman, I'll try and leave the door open. So that by the way, that's good practice generally, so you're not accused of sexual harassment. I mean, look at Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz got accused of having sex with every woman he ever shook hands with in the middle of that campaign. Yeah. And everybody was looking at that on our side going, wait, Ted Cruz? Like, really?
Yeah. Getting beyond the moral side of it, we talked about this quite a bit earlier on in the program. As a public figure, it's a very prudent practice. People need to understand that. I mean, you probably had at least one or two crazy fans. We have. And they'll say anything. And so you can't put yourself in a position where they can just snap a picture and say, look, Ben Shapiro was here with this person. And they'll run with it. So
100% right. It's 100% right. Now, out of respect for my wife, I wouldn't want that to be even if it were, completely false, which I hope it would be. Even if something like that were completely false, I wouldn't want my wife to be in a position of now having to take questions on, like, was I stooping some random fan or something. I mean, like, the idea that people don't know about this sort of thing in public is just absurd, and it's just a slap against Pence generally. And beyond which, I mean, the idea that Pence is respectful enough of his marriage, and obviously something that his wife cares about, to not put himself in a situation like he's not saying that they're implying that what he's saying is that every time he goes out with a woman to dinner that it's a potential sex mate, and that's not what he's saying at all. First of all, would it be any better for the feminists if he narrowed it down? If he was like, I go to dinner with all the ugly ones, just the hot ones I never go to dinner with. Like, you think that'd make it better for the feminists?
Seriously, how many women out there, either married or in a serious relationship, would actually object to this practice? I mean, God forbid that you'd actually do something that would strengthen your relationship and your marriage.
The whole thing's ridiculous.
Well, you brought it up.
At CPAC every year, CPAC was known for years and years. I mean, you know this, dude. CPAC was known for years and years and years as the shtuppen place for young conservative people, right?
Yeah.
And that was because when you put men and women in close proximity working together, things sometimes happen. That doesn't mean they always happen. It doesn't mean they happen most of the time. But why in the world would you put yourself in a situation where if something, goes awry, then you've destroyed your marriage? Like, why would you even do that? And if that's his role, first of all, my guess is that Mike Pence at some point has had a business dinner with somebody who is a woman and a member of his staff. Like, I highly doubt there's that this is like a hard and fast rule where he said, no, I can't do it. I've known this woman for 20 years and we've never had anything going on, but I cannot go to dinner with her even to discuss the budget when he was governor of. Like, I just can't imagine that that's the case.
Yeah.
But again, here's the thing that's amazing. The left has zero evidence whatsoever, zero, that Pence has ever discriminated against a woman or somehow limited her ability to be in a position of power. So instead, they just make that up, right? They just assume we won't go to dinner with a woman. That must mean he's discriminating against women. Well, you need actual evidence of discrimination in order to accuse somebody of that. That's just absurd.
And of course, that's exactly right. There's no evidence that any women have had their careers impeded because Mike Pence refused to have dinner with them one-on-one. So why not just invent the narrative instead? Incidentally, the author of the National Post piece seems to have a different attitude towards Bill Clinton, the man that almost exclusively has dinner with women that aren't his wife. New office and Bill Clinton's on The Daily Show tonight. Night equals made. So, 1. How incredibly sad is your life? And 2, if only she were old enough to be a White House intern in the 90s, that would have really made her night. And what could possibly be the result of all the hysteria around sexual harassment in the workplace and rape culture? Perhaps the next article might provide a clue. First Men, Now Boys Are Going Their Own Way by Corinne Barraclough. Now, for those that don't know, Corinne Barraclough is very critical of feminism and often writes articles in the Daily Telegraph and The Spectator on that issue. This article, though, is not one of her best, but it's not entirely her fault. There's a growing movement of men in Australia called Men Going Their Own Way. It's an offshoot of the men's rights movement, but rather than getting stuck in and tackling issues, these guys have vowed to stay away from women, stop dating, and not have children. Essentially, MGTOW is a statement about living your life your way rather than trying to make a woman happy or being a slave to cultural expectations, one New South Wales member says. So straight away, that is a much more generous description of the MGTOW movement than you usually see in any article in the mainstream media. But it's the next part I have a small problem with. This isn't about a specific rulebook, more a mindset, although there are purists in the movement who are the most extreme and avoid women entirely. There's a growing number of men who've had enough of feminism and enough of being told they have to work for a greater good, which doesn't actually exist. Now, this is always asserted, a growing number of men, yet no one can put any numbers around it. I've seen MGTOWs themselves claim that their numbers are doubling every year because the number of people Googling MGTOW is doubling at such a rate, which is obviously a ridiculous conclusion to reach. But as I said, it's not entirely Corinne's fault because there just isn't much in the way of data out there. And so what are you left with? Well, anecdotes, of course. Tom, 15, from New South Wales, is what you could call the growing number of TGTOW. Ooh, new acronym. Teens going their own way. It's probably not true of all women, but I've got the feeling that women are dangerous. Maybe the men around me have just had bad experiences. It's scary being a teenage boy. I'm not sure how it's all meant to fit together in the future. Last year, my uncle lost everything because his wife of 40 years decided she didn't love him anymore. Just like that, she randomly got up and left. It got nasty, and he lost everything. His house, cars, and loads of his money. There's no way I'm ever getting married. My older brother, who's 20, was dating a girl for a few months. She turned really nasty in the breakup and made a string of allegations to the police. That made me suspicious of women too. My brother's a good guy. Why should she be able to just say what she wants, accuse him of anything, and then get on with her life like that? It doesn't seem fair to me. I'm not sure what rights I have. Maybe none? Well, I think you're right to be cautious, but I don't think walling yourself off completely from relationships is the best long-term strategy. Tom is only 15, so obviously the stakes are not as high for him as they are for a guy contemplating marriage and children. So my advice for guys Tom's age would be this. Take the time to figure out what you want out of life. Put yourself as the top priority and develop your own human capital. Also understand what you will and won't compromise on when it comes to a relationship. What's important to you? Don't be that guy that goes along just to get laid. Learn how to delay gratification, and if you have to compromise your own principles too much, Do away with gratification altogether and look for a better match. That's hard to do when you're young, but it can save you a lot of headaches. But I don't want to preach. If you weigh it all up and you still think it's not worth it and you'd rather concentrate on yourself, then all the power to you. There's nothing worse than being that emasculated middle-aged guy that shrugs his shoulders and mumbles some platitude like, "Oh, happy wife, happy life." Of course, it's best if your wife is happy, but not at the cost of making yourself miserable. But if we have a society that increasingly goes its own way, what does that look like? Well, probably something like Japan. The National Institute of Population and Social Security Research published a new report into the country's sinking birth rate and found that 69% of men and 59% of women in Japan do not have sexual partners. It also found that 42% of both sexes remain virgins and 30% said they have no hope for a relationship. Now, that article's about 6 months old, but I bring it up because Japan is the canary in the coal mine for what happens when people give up on relationships. And I'm not saying that that will necessarily be bad. It may force more automation and therefore innovation, since there won't be enough young people to look after the elderly. But that's a topic for another day. So what would your advice be for young guys like Tom contemplating relationships? Also, do you think it's prudent to avoid being alone with women in the workplace? Let me know what you think in the comments below. See you next time.